Department of Justice prosecutors making headway in the January 6th probe. All presidents have some valid executive privilege. That includes presidents you might not like. But Donald Trump has tried to abuse that power, of which he, like any president, has some valid claim to, with many assertions of completely extreme excessive secrecy, abusing or referencing the privilege to outright ask aides to defy entire lawful investigations, and something many lawyers do, which is cite that thing to then try to create years-long delays. All of those things have worked up to a point until now. Tonight, we're reporting on the first known breakthrough for DOJ prosecutors against Trump on this score. The prosecutors getting top White House aides to Mike Pence to testify despite the sometimes valid claim to executive privilege. The Pence aide's testimony is, quote, the first identifiable time that confidentiality that Trump had tried to maintain around the West Wing has basically failed, according to CNN, which reported this scoop. Now prosecutors may compel additional testimony from other aides, White House lawyers, all part of these secret court proceedings, which is why we're only learning about little bits of this at a time. It's another step that's been taken amidst the evidence gathered by the January 6th committee, which we know has exerted a kind of pressure or added a kind of evidence to the criminal probe at the DOJ. The committee is continuing its work. Indeed, just today, they heard from former Trump aide Hope Hicks. There are also reports the DOJ is bearing down on a Trump aide in the other criminal case about the classified documents allegedly stolen and brought to Mar-a-Lago. They're eyeing this military valet and cook, as well as the guy who used to run the Pentagon. Remember Acting Defense Secretary Kash Patel, who was pushing this claim in August.
On the way out of the White House, he issued further declassification orders, declassifying whole sets of documents. And this is a key fact that most Americans are missing. President Trump, as the sitting president, is a unilateral authority for declassification. He can literally stand over a set of documents and say, these are now declassified.
These are now declassified. It has almost like a magician-style approach to declassification. And here's the thing about what you just heard. I will call it fact-check true on the part that the president does have this unilateral authority. That is how it works, that it is a part of the president's actual power, not something that is done, for example, through law or Congress. And then the other part probably false, at a minimum misleading, because they haven't been able to substantiate any evidence that Donald Trump actually did use the powers in order to declassify a bunch of the material at Mar-a-Lago. Another way to say that is, if there was a scrap of evidence that this was declassified material that was in his lawful possession, I don't know that you'd get a magistrate judge to approve the search of his home in the first place. So the DOJ is basically probing, among other things, whether Patel has lied in an illegal way about that, as they try to get a lot more cooperation from these individuals. We turn now to someone who knows these issues inside and out. Mary McCord is a former acting assistant attorney general for national security at the DOJ, also a Georgetown law professor. You really know exactly these issues, and some of them are even trickier than they sound, because there are, as mentioned, unilateral authorities, and there are national security concerns that sometimes are sort of in equipoise with legal concerns. Thank you for being here. Given everything I just mentioned, I'm curious what you think of the status of both those cases, the national security versus whether laws were broken.
So, there's a lot seems to be going on at once here right now, Ari, as you've indicated. I don't think we'll see anything groundbreaking this close to the election, but the wheels are still moving. What's been interesting recently is the revelations of the department actually seeking the assistance of the chief judge of the U.S. District Court here in the District of Columbia with respect to compelling certain testimony of various people, whether it's Kash Patel, the military aide in the sense of the Mar-a-Lago investigation, or White House counsel and White House advisors in the sense of the investigation into the January 6th attack on the Capitol. And what would likely be happening there is the department would be seeking the judge to make some rulings about the assertions of privilege. And the judge has the ability to do that, because if the witnesses are coming into the grand jury and either trying to issue, sort of blanket privilege claims or claiming privilege on questions that the department believes they don't have a substantial basis to seek the privilege on, the department can go to the chief judge and litigate that. And it appears, at least by the reporting, that that's what's happening.
Yeah, and as you say, that's sort of the negotiation and the push and pull to get these people in. Unlike the January 6th committee, which I think viewers have seen, gathers facts, and they talk to people sometimes who aren't involved in anything wrong, where there may not be a crime. There just may be something that Congress in its fact-finding and other legislative oversight is investigating. It would seem to be pretty different when you start bringing Pence aides and others and going through what you just described, that effort, before a DOJ criminal grand jury that's been impaneled. What does it tell you, while those are secretive processes, that they are bringing those type of White House people in?
Yeah. Well, to just be clear, like, it doesn't necessarily mean that those people themselves are under investigation, right? I mean, they would have now, in some cases, they may be concerned about their own criminal culpability and assert the Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination. Other cases, they may be asserting attorney-client privilege, particularly in the case of White House counsel, for communications with President Trump about things that would be within the scope of that privilege. And then they could also be asserting executive privilege, which is this notion that that candid communications between the president and his top advisors are entitled to some privilege. So the fact, but all of those, none of those are completely unyielding. I mean, the Fifth Amendment is probably the closest to it in terms of a person cannot be compelled to incriminate themselves. But sometimes a person asserts the Fifth Amendment, and a court may say, there's really no reasonable likelihood that the response to that question that DOJ is posing would lead to a likelihood of a criminal prosecution, right? So even that can be something you can take up to the chief judge. But to your question about what does this say, it says that they're honing in on some of these closest advisors to the president when it comes to both of these cases, Mar-a-Lago as well as January 6th. And that's something that, I think for many months, people have been kind of waiting to see that happen. And I've said for many, many months that DOJ is going to have laid a very, very solid groundwork before it goes and talks to those highest level and closest officials and non-officials in the case of the military, helper or aide or whatever exactly he was. And now we're starting to see that. We're starting to see these conversations, the demonstrated critical need for the evidence from these individuals.
Yeah, all makes sense. Mary McCord, thank you as always. Appreciate your time. Hey, I'm Ari Melber. Thanks for watching The Beat. I wanted to let you know I'm writing a foreword to the January 6th committee's full report, which is coming out soon from HarperCollins. You can go pre-order the book right now, and it'll come to you first when the report comes out in the fall or whenever the government releases it. Just search Melber Jan 6th on Amazon or your favorite independent book site and click pre-order. You'll be the first to get both the report and my new piece on the coup conspiracy. You can also go to melberbook.com and order it there.